Good morning, everyone. My name is Sonia Allen, and I'm here today in my personal capacity as a public health law and policy researcher who has been examining the regulation of assisted reproduction, donor conception, and surrogacy for almost 2 decades. Together with Stephanie, a donor-conceived person and great advocate for donor-conceived rights, we would like to present this session to you to connect you with the experience of and impact upon people born as a result of such practices. Specifically, the United Nations is celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Convention on the Rights of Children. We would like to take this opportunity to recognise that while donor conception and surrogacy practices have become increasingly widespread, governments in most countries of the world have failed to enact laws that protect the rights of children born as a result, including but not limited to rights that relate to knowing one's identity, having a relationship or knowing one's family, and not the right not to be bought or sold. Moreover, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that debates on how to regulate assisted reproduction and surrogacy are often absent of the voices of donor-conceived or surrogate-born people, or only include them as an afterthought. Today, we introduce you to their voices and implore you to remember the saying, not about them, without them. Let us seize this opportunity to listen to the people who are born as a result of donor conception and surrogacy, and to hear from them what they know to be in their own best interests.
Yes, and in doing so, you will see that the breaches of our fundamental rights cause many complications, issues, and bewilderment. To help you understand better, we built the presentation around several statements. Each one will be explained by a donor-conceived or a surrogacy-born person who share their lived experience, so you can have an insight on their lives and the complications they suffer. As Mia said, we traveled from all over the world at our own expenses in our own time to be here, because we think it's too important not to be. Please try and listen and reflect on some of the core issues we endure when decisions are being made at the expense of us. And if you want to come and talk to us afterwards, don't hesitate. This being said, I would like to give the floor to G. Roberts. G is a donor-conceived, born out of surrogacy, and she's the only person here in our group who had the knowledge and the contact with her extended family. Her talk will be followed by many others who will show you what happens when this is not the case, when commodification occurs, and when our voices are not heard or even considered. So here's to you.
It was 1997, and my parents had been trying for a child for 10 years, and were now in their mid-40s. They decided to begin their surrogacy journey with COTS, a not-for-profit agency in the UK. They created their profile, which was sent out to potential surrogate mothers, and was soon chosen by a woman called Sue. When I asked Sue about this decision, she said it was my dad's goofy smile that made her choose my parents as their next couple to help. Sue had one son of her own via a sperm donor and had already completed one surrogacy journey. My parents and Sue met and got on well, and their traditional surrogacy journey began. After conceiving in their first cycle, they went through the pregnancy with regular contact. I was born in 1998, and after having been carried by Sue for 9 months, I was taken home by my parents, Jenny and Jerry. I've known about my origins from the moment I was born, and my parents used to read me a book called My Mummy's Tummy is Broken to explain Sue's role in my story. I've been fortunate enough to have regular contact with Sue and all of my half-siblings all of my life. Every year we meet up as one big extended family, and I believe that this family model of ongoing kinship and friendship has been the foundations for the journeys which our families have been on together, and it's also something that makes me feel really proud to be born through surrogacy. More recently, I've made contact with more of Sue's family, and this is something which has been important in the formation of my identity as a surrogate-born person. Whilst I recognise that many surrogacy-born and donor-conceived people do not have this opportunity, I feel very fortunate to be able to have open contact with my surrogate family. I believe that the only reason this was possible was the honesty which my parents gave to me from the moment of my birth, and I will be forever grateful to them for this. Thank you.
My name's Beth, and this is my sibling Maddie. We grew up believing that we were full siblings, the bio children of both our parents. We were told at 16 and 18 years that we were both donor sperm conceived, and we later confirmed via direct-to-consumer DNA testing that we were half siblings. What is our relationship now? Who are we? I didn't know where my idiosyncrasies and mannerisms came from. This made me feel wrong because my family did not share many significant aspects of my personality. They didn't understand the other half of me. I believe these idiosyncrasies were character flaws, but now I know that they're inherited. I've since met my paternal biological family and I've seen them reflected back at me.
I grew up and developed an identity when my donor-conceived status was disclosed to me. I grew up and developed an identity. When my donor-conceived status was disclosed to me, I didn't know who I was anymore. Not being able to access my biological family leaves me asking myself, who am I? And a harder question, am I brave enough to find out? Growing up donor-conceived, I didn't feel a familial connection with my father, but I was told that I definitely had one. I believed my parents, and I learned not to trust my feelings. Next week, I will meet my paternal biological family. I can see my past, but how I will grow from here is unknown. I can't predict or control the effect that meeting them will have on my identity development, and that is scary because it feels a little bit like falling in love.
My name is Albert Franz. I grew up in a multiracial family with 3 adopted siblings. Our family harbored 2 deep secrets. The first was that we were torn apart by violence. The second secret was my own identity. I'm literally not who I say I am. Not until I was turning 30 did I find out why my father took most of his rage out on me, sometimes leaving me unable to go to school for days at a time. Former neighbors finally told me, he's not your father. I was never supposed to know I'm the product of reproductive technology. No records were kept. It's only thanks to technology unforeseen 45 years ago that I was able to find my true identity. After 14 years of searching for the proverbial needle in a haystack, DNA testing, and putting the puzzle pieces together, just last year, I found my missing family. I was never supposed to know my Jewish identity. I was never supposed to know my 4 amazing half-siblings with whom I have so much in common. I was never supposed to know my own father. I wasn't supposed to know he even exists. How is that in the best interest of the child? When we met, it was almost as though we'd known each other our whole lives. I discovered my musical talent in my late teens and became a concert pianist despite total lack of support. I moved to Vienna, Austria. Incredibly, it turns out half my newfound family emigrated from Vienna, Austria. My father's a hand surgeon. I got his hands, my piano hands. And my grandmother was even a pianist. I'm incredibly grateful that my new family has welcomed me with open arms. I feel a sense of belonging for the first time in my life. I now have a family. I was never supposed to know my own identity or half my immediate family. This is a grave injustice and a direct violation of Articles 7 and 8 of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. It's high time to honor the Convention, to eliminate all layers of secrecy and shame, to open source identity. It is my sincere hope that future children of reproductive technology will be entitled to know their full families throughout their lives, that social as well as biological parents will be fully recognized, as this is the only way to fully honor both nurture and nature. Identity should not literally be a corporate or state secret. It must be considered a fundamental human right.
My name is Katarina, and I found out I was donor conceived 8 years ago. It was a relief. Finally, I had all the answers of why I was so different of my family. My bio dad was my mother's OBG, a young Angolan medical doctor who went to Portugal to finish his medicine degree. All his roots were there in Angola, and I have always wanted to go to that country devastated by 40 years of civil war without knowing why. But something inside of me knew my roots were there. The first time I landed in Luanda with my bio dad, I knew I belonged there. Now I have a legal problem. Angolan nationality law says that it is eligible to have Angolan citizenship all those who has an Angolan progenitor. I do have. But the country I was born, Portugal, says there is no link between me and my biological father because I have a lie in my birth certificate. I love the father who raised me, and in my heart, he is my father also, but not in my genes. When I was born in 1984, there was no law ruling this kind of situation, but now the Portuguese law is clear. There is no legal link between the offspring and the donor. It's legal to lie on the first document of a child. Angola has a lack of law. Donor conception is not just a problem of personal identity. It can hide several legal issues with different countries involved. I don't know what's going to be the decision of the Angolan court, but one thing I know. I'm Angolan with all my heart and soul, and I won't give up of my identity. It's my right and my duty from our children. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Damien Adams, and I was conceived in 1973 from donor sperm in South Australia. Growing up, I had a great deal of difficulty forming my identity. I had many similarities to my mother and her family, but I could not be more different from my dad and his family, both in looks and personality. Every time I looked in the mirror, I didn't know half the features staring back at me, simply because I didn't have any biological paternal heritage in my life. So I did not know half of the face staring back at me. This is what my face looked like to me. Another part of my identity is my birth certificate, this document. However, mine is a lie, because the man listed on here is not my biological father, as it is for most of you. I am not descended from a long line of Adamses, as this certificate would indicate. So I went to court to get mine changed to reflect the truth. While I did not know who my biological father was, I wanted that section left blank or changed to unknown. So after 4 court appearances, representing myself and up against not 1, but 3 lawyers from the Attorney General's office, I finally lost my case. I felt like a second-class citizen because donor-conceived people are the only people who cannot challenge paternity. My birth certificate is a fraudulent document created by a government that does not want to record the truth. I do not need a piece of paper to tell me to love the man who raised me. And as for the man who is my biological father, after 30 years of actively searching, I finally met him 2 months ago. It was like I was looking at myself 30 years from now. The similarity in looks and personality were more than mind-blowing. They were life-changing. I now have my face and my identity. Well, most of my identity, because my birth certificate still is not worth the piece of paper it was printed on. Thank you.
We're now going to view a clip recorded by a man called Joey, who discusses the effect of discovering that he has dozens and dozens of siblings.
Hi, my name is Joey Hoffman. 32 years ago, I was born and raised in Rotterdam, the Netherlands. Since March 2017, I know that I'm donor conceived. Before that discovery, I always lived under the assumption that the father who raised me was my biological father. However, I always had the feeling that something didn't add up in my family. I can best describe it as an uncomfortable feeling you feel deep inside. It's a feeling of being different, feeling alone, because you cannot place it or really define it. After a fierce legal battle, I uncovered that the doctor who treated my parents due to fertility problems was actually my biological father. When the news hit me for the first time, I was very angry, but also sad. It made me realize that I'm not a product out of love. Instead, I'm a product out of lies and commercialization. Yet, the truth also generates a form of relief, which gives me some peace of mind. Because now I know the truth and I can continue with my life. Still, there's one big question that remains. How on earth could this happen? Between March 2017 and now, I found 75 half-siblings who live all over the world. There could be more. I'm happy to know them and I wouldn't want to miss them in my life. It's nice being able to reflect myself in others. Nevertheless, I feel like I'm the result of a human mass production. Because we are with so many, it's almost impossible to bond with all of them, or being able to provide enough support processing this. Those 75 different human lives, each with their own unique story, have become almost abstract. The absurdness is for many of us the new normal. I blame my biological father for having crossed a medical ethical boundary by deciding to use his own sperm and conceiving so many offspring. However, the reason why he was able to do so was because there was a lack in regulation and insufficient supervision from the government. As a result, he thought he was untouchable. It's important we learn from the mistakes that have been made. We can only achieve this by making agreements on international level, so we can prevent this from ever happening again. The past has shown us that we cannot rely on the so-called good intentions of the fertility industry, or even the good intentions of parents nor governments. Please, try to ensure that from now on the interest and fundamental rights of children truly come first and are no longer at the bottom of the priority list. Thank you for listening.
Good morning. My name is Jo. I have a congenital heart defect called tetralogy of Fallot, which is hereditary in a small number of cases. My parents always told me and my doctors that there was no history of heart issues on my paternal side. Aged 54, I discovered that I was donor conceived and my father was Mr. Anonymous. Amidst the shock of discovery was the trauma of knowing that I had been giving inaccurate medical history all my life. This was incredibly scary. My cardiologist was absolutely horrified and arranged for me to undergo genetic testing to ensure that I was not a carrier of the gene mutations known to cause fallows. Access to medical history doesn't just affect the donor-conceived individual, it affects their descendants. Lack of access to medical history, as Joe here is going to tell you, can kill. Thank you.
Hello and thank you. I don't have the time here to list all the ways in which we're medically disadvantaged, but I do hope to honour the plight of two people who are important to me. Alison Davenport is from the same clinic as me. When she was suffering from leukemia, she needed more than ever to be able to contact her paternal family. She wanted to ask if they could help save her life by giving her a bone marrow transplant. Appealing for legislative reform, she said, "You can't help thinking that anyone born via donor conception is part of some lost generation, which the medical profession and the governments are hoping will die off without needing to be dealt with. But I am still here, and I need this information, not just for my mental closure, but to fight my cancer." Alison died while still obstructed from contacting those relatives. Laws were unaffected in the UK as her plea fell on deaf ears. Narelle Gresh was a close friend of mine and many of us here. She spent 15 years trying to access information about her father and kin, along with knowledge of her medical history. She appealed to the authority that held her sealed records, saying, "I believe the truth will set me free, and I ask for access to my records for this reason." It wasn't until Narelle was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and was in the last 6 weeks of her life that she was finally allowed the information that enabled her to find and meet her father. She died at just 30 years old, learning too late of a genetic predisposition to bowel cancer on her paternal side. There is now a law in Australia that overturns donor anonymity in her state, Narelle's Law. Hopefully this will help the many, including her 8 unknown half-siblings, who are likely to be ignorant of their own donor conception and their genetic predisposition to bowel cancer. These are 2 preventable deaths of donor-conceived people, but there will be many more. By design, we live with medical and genetic misinformation and ignorance, impacting our physical and our mental health. The best interests of the child were not protected by these designs. Alison's question still resonates. Did they not think of the implications for the children they created? I honor your courage and memory, Alison and Narelle.
My name is Hailie. I've discovered I have somewhere between 25 and 40 donor siblings. I was lucky in that at least there were records kept that documented how many siblings I have, but legally I'm not allowed to know who they are. Yet, thanks to DNA testing, I have discovered a few of my donor siblings. That is, that they're from the same donor but were raised in different families. I've been completely stunned by our similarities, not only in appearance, but in our interests, aptitudes, and hobbies. I discovered I studied at university with one of my brothers in the same field of study at the same time. One of my sisters collects the same obscure things as me. We both collect pieces from iconic Australian illustrator May Gibbs. and another of my sisters dreams of buying a big bush block for nature conservation, just like me. It's uncanny. It's clear to me that they're not strangers at all. Being denied knowledge of even the names of my siblings has left me feeling haunted. I find myself looking for them in strangers' faces as I walk down the street, on the train, even in Switzerland. They could be right next to me and I could never know it. I feel disempowered, like I'm not allowed to call the feeling of longing to meet them what it really is: grief. Some of my siblings feel that they cannot date without asking their prospective partners to do a DNA test, just in case they are one of our siblings. They can't live their lives like their peers due to the risks that donor conception has burdened to them. How is this fair? How will this impact our own children, who may have hundreds of unknown cousins? Despite the bonds that many donor-conceived people feel with their siblings and the risks of not knowing them, we are systematically denied this information for the convenience of the wishes of everybody else.
Hi, I'm Shani. All my life, people have said things to me like, "There's a girl who looks just like you," and it still happens all the time. I grew up. I went to school. I went on a lot of dates. I had some serious relationships, and eventually I got married. I was 3 months pregnant when I found out I was donor conceived. I thought I knew who I was, so I thought I knew who my baby was, but she was 1/4 a stranger with an unknown biological grandparent. My husband could have been my half-brother. Half the medical history I'd been filling out on forms was meaningless. My ethnicity was different to what I thought it was. My husband jokes about marrying under false pretenses and asking for his money back. Now, every time someone says to me, "There's someone who looks just like you," I get an adrenaline rush. I ask for all the details, where they saw them, if they know their name. I wonder if any of the girls that people told me about were actually my donor-conceived half-sisters, or if any of the men I kissed were my donor-conceived brothers. I'm searching for half-siblings who might not even know they're donor-conceived. Their names are on record, but their record keepers won't give me this information, so the only way I can find them is through detective work. I've gone through all the official channels, and so far I've had the opportunity to meet 2 half-sisters. So if you know someone who looks like me, please let me know.
Good afternoon. My name is Sebastiana. What does it mean for one's life to be a living experiment? Well, it begins with the fact that as a donor-conceived person, you are bombarded with instances which stretch the boundaries of acceptability in regards to human rights. In my personal experience, I grew up in an Italian-American family. I spent half of my life in the US and the other half in Italy, Mideast, and Marshall Islands. I am an only child with no siblings of any kind, a rare reality in the donor-conceived community. I found out I was donor-conceived almost 20 years ago at 23 years old. The social experiment started to reveal itself once I was able to unveil the truth. Through consumer DNA testing, I cracked a seemingly impossible endogamous puzzle by triangulating distant relatives using med school yearbooks. I found him, who I now call Bio-Dad, and we have a great relationship full of amazing similarities. I discovered I have Jewish heritage from him, and tomorrow I am going to visit my bio-great-grandmother's shtetl, as she escaped prior to the Holocaust. Importantly, my Bio-Dad and I discovered that we were lied to by the fertility doctor. After both of us presenting him with independent requests, the doctor deliberately kept us in the dark regarding the amount of offspring and siblings, and also vital medical information. I was created as a solution for other people's needs. I feel like I am part of a propaganda program, similar to breeding apple varieties. Without acknowledgement of our rights as humans, we donor-conceived are just commodities in a twisted experiment. Thank you.
My name is Courtney, and I was conceived in Melbourne in 1976. My parents wanted a baby, and doctors had a method of providing them with one. Nobody needed to know about the method of my conception, least of all me. My mother's doctor received great accolades for being a pioneer in the field. An industry sprang up from what appeared to simply be the altruistic practice of solving a problem and fulfilling a desire. But nobody considered the implications of having a child grow up in a culture of shame and secrecy, that I might perceive a sense that things weren't quite right, that I would feel a sense of disconnection, a need to seek approval and acceptance. Nobody thought to prepare my family for the difficulties we would face and the profound effect it would have. I found out I was donor conceived when I was 21 years old by reading it in my medical file. It was less shocking than you may imagine. It made sense, but I wish my parents had had the courage to tell me themselves. I wish that my parents and the doctors who facilitated this had considered what this would really mean, being deprived of half of my medical history, half of my family history, and of the choice to know my biological parent. My sense of identity was shattered, and it took 20 years before I could begin the process of piecing it together accurately. 6 days before I turned 40, I found my biological father. Once again, it made sense, and once again, it involved complexity and loss. What worries me, us, deeply, enough to fly across the world, is that this is still happening, creating children with the express intention to sever a fundamental biological connection purely for the profit and the needs of others. Thank you.
Hi. Is it working? Hi, I'm Miff, and this is Sara. We are both donor-conceived, created by science under ethically bankrupt guarantees of anonymity for the sperm donors.
We note that despite decades of profiteering in the global trade in sperm, eggs, embryo, and wombs, this is the first time the United Nations is hearing from a group of the human beings created by these practices. All of us have paid our own way to come here as private individuals, and we're glad to be here. But we should have had a voice and your attention right from the start.
Whilst my biological father's file from 1977 was miraculously preserved, I was denied access to it. I was prepared to tell my story, which appeared with my photo on the front page of a national newspaper, and as a result, he contacted me.
The medical records of my conception were deliberately destroyed by one of Australia's largest public hospitals, along with the records of at least 80, but possibly hundreds of others. No one has been held to account.
If the people conceived using donor conception and surrogacy want to know their biological and birth families, and we know that they do, as is their right, then we must inquire, what is the justification for denying a child, a human being, the right to their own identity and ethnicity, the right to know and have contact with their biological family members? In the clash between the desires of prospective parents, the fertility industry, and our human rights, as we have heard here today, it is rare that our rights and interests prevail.
There is no right to have a child under international law. Children are not goods or services. that the state or business can guarantee or provide. They are human beings themselves with rights. The UN Special Rapporteur on the Sale of Children stated last year that commercial surrogacy usually results in the sale of children. Well, it's not just commercial surrogacy. You have heard here today from donor-conceived people who are bought and sold. And we would like to acknowledge the donor-conceived people who should be here with us today, but due to these systems and practices, have already lost their lives.
So when we are considering donor conception and surrogacy, we must be starting from the position that these practices are not in the best interests of children, where we know that if someone is conceived in this manner, their rights, as stated under the Convention, will be at the very least impacted, if not negated entirely. Sarah, are there any circumstances in which donor conception and surrogacy can be allowed?
We believe this can only happen if it is legislated like open adoption. G's ability to know her family is lucky. It is not hers by legal right. For donor conception and surrogacy to be ethical, all children must have a legal right to know their biological parents, all of their biological siblings, and also their birth mother, whether or not she is also a biological parent. They have a right to know that none of those parties were paid, compensated, or otherwise rewarded. This is non-negotiable.
There is no jurisdiction in the world which currently upholds and protects these rights. Consequently, we say that wherever in the world a state allows donor conception and surrogacy today, it is unethical. It should be strictly regulated, akin to an open adoption, or it should come to a halt. Further, it is galling to know that principles, guidelines and legislation are often drafted by people who know so little about our lived experiences. You would never make Indigenous policy without consulting Indigenous people. It is fundamentally offensive to think that many who sit here today and elsewhere do not take a strong stance to prohibit commercial practices that commodify and dehumanise us. And not only us, as the nature of these transactions often also involve disadvantaged gamete donors or surrogate mothers who are also trafficked.
Children have a right to know their biological parents and siblings and to seek contact with them, not through detective work when they're adults, but right from the start. Anything less than this serves doctors, commissioning parents, big business, everyone but the child.
Children also have a right to expect that by law, if they are created from third-party gametes, they will have no more than 10 biological siblings, and ideally much less, and that they will know who each and every one of those siblings are.
Governments must enshrine the biological origins of their citizens in birth certificates, the one document that parents cannot conceal or alter.
The international community has a duty to prevent cross-border gamete trafficking, the exploitation and commodification of children, baby factories, and to encourage national governments to uphold their own laws.
Finally, the medical profession should go back to first principles. First, do no harm. They must put the rights of the child first, and they have a duty to tell all adults the most important truth about fertility instead of pushing them into fertility treatment. If you want to have a child, you need to start as early as possible. Only then can you give yourself the best chance of avoiding the vortex of IVF, third-party material, surrogacy, lies, and exploitation.
Of course, the heartbreak of wanting a child is something I think we can all empathise with. However, supporting and allowing this international commercial exploitative industry to grow unheeded is at best misguided. Expensive, quite often harmful and ineffective fertility treatments are not the solution.
Every child has the right under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which we celebrate here today, to identity, to family, including biological family, and to not be bought or sold. Every child has the right to be heard. We are the products of this industry, and we have not been heard or respected. If we are included at all, it is as an afterthought, a tick-the-box exercise so that governments and businesses can progress with their documents and their proposals. But we are the voices of the surrogacy and donor-conceived people. We're now grown and our voices are stronger. We know what is in our best interests and what is not, and we hope you're listening. Please come and find and speak to us afterwards about all these things. We would love to talk to you.
My name is Anne Skelton, and I'm here to moderate this panel. But before I get into the panel, I think you'll all agree with me that that was extraordinary.